Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final mailbox for the 29th of October 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, and for the last time bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. I'll be giving you a few details about the new show, which hopefully will be airing tomorrow, assuming nothing breaks, at the end of this video. So, for the final time, let us go into the mailbox and delve just a little bit, shall we? Game in the background is XCOM. This is a fairly large piece of footage, very lengthy indeed. It's a good mission as well. Difficult, to say the least. Alright, first email comes in here from Jay Griffith that says, your recent video voicing your concerns over PlanetSide 2 has me wondering about the importance of land vehicles in a game that requires multiple players in order to operate effectively. The only games I've played that use this system for their vehicles are Bohemia Interactive's Armor series and Nova Logic's Joint Operations. In both these games, it is impossible to drive and gun at the same time. More often than not, I've seen with these kinds of vehicles, particularly in Joint Ops, players will still drive solo but adopt a strategy where they will either attempt to engage the enemy at long range or will move, fire, and then move again before the enemy has a chance to lock onto their position. If PlanetSide 2 does implement vehicles that need multiple players on a wider scale, what sort of impact would this have on gameplay when compared to the current system in place? Do you think this system should be used more often in large-scale battle games? It's actually quite disturbing that we don't see more multi-crew vehicles when it comes to competitive games. It's actually gotten to the point where I think that it just comes down to catering far too much to the lone wolf demographic, of which I suppose there are quite a few people. They just want to be able to get in a tank and then gun the tank and everything will be wonderful for them. And they get to roll around as an armored powerhouse destroying everything until they get shot in the back with an RPG. PlanetSide 1 prevented you from doing that. For the most part, anyway. And when they did allow you to do it, it caused a hell of a lot of problems. Lots of problems with the game. Because when they did allow it, it was with the so-called BFR, Battle Frame Robotics, which basically single-handedly killed the game. And it was a horrible, horrible situation, because you could have these one-man jump jet mechs that could wreck tanks, they could wreck infantry, they could even fight aircraft if they had the right kind of equipment. It was bizarre that they would even allow such a thing, but they did. And it caused a lot of problems. So PlanetSide veterans are really worried about that coming back, and some of them see the tank system as something which can be considered a callback to that idea. Here's the thing though, I've heard the counterpoint from the PlanetSide development team a number of times, and it basically boils down to this. There's two factors in play. The first one being that apparently, some people forget how much it actually sucks when you aren't running an organized group in order to find a good gunner. And the second point is that players in PlanetSide 2 are actually going to be spending cert points into their tank to make it better. And how much does it suck if you spend a bunch of cert points and spend a lot of time getting your tank up to scratch, and then you don't even get to fire it? There's also one other factor. When you spawn the tank, you're the one spending the resources to get it, and main battle tanks are quite expensive resource-wise. You can't just keep spawning them over and over again. So if you're the one investing in the tank, then surely you should get the benefit of the tank. And if you don't get to gun the tank, and you have to rely on some idiot probably shooting at the wrong target, or indeed just missing everything, then you're going to get highly frustrated. So I can certainly see the problem there. I'm still in two minds after hearing this explanation as to whether or not it is a good idea to do tanks the way that they have. Since you have in-game voice over IP, it's actually very easy now to communicate with your gunner, as opposed to PlanetSide 1, where it definitely wasn't. If you weren't on Vent or TeamSpeak with this guy, then communicating with him was an absolute nightmare, not to mention the fact that you now have a spotting system, as well as a variety of voice macros that can actually work in that situation. So I feel that that could operate quite nicely. You know what I'd actually like to see would be maybe a really advanced main battle tank that came in later on that required that kind of gameplay, yet was actually very powerful as a direct result of that. Maybe it took 3, possibly even 4 people to crew this thing. That would be nice. That would be kind of neat indeed. But it is disturbing to see how few games really do this. We are getting a couple coming into play. In fact, they both happen to be airship games, Air Buccaneers and Guns of Icarus. Both of those require a large number of people to crew a ship. Not as many as I would like, but you do end up running into a problem there. and this is something that Guns of Icarus and Air Buccaneers both suffer from to some degree, and that's going to put off some players. I don't think it's inherently a bad idea. I don't think it's mechanically flawed, but it is niche. It is limiting. Because a lot of people want a lot of control over their game experience, if all you are is a gunner or an engineer or something along those lines in a larger vehicle, then you don't necessarily get the fulfilling and varied game experience that you want. It's actually a very monotonous, very repetitive game experience. The enjoyment comes from cooperating with other people. So if you're playing Guns of Icarus or Air Buccaneers or various Battlefield mods, for instance, like Battlefield Pirates, which was an absolutely fantastic mod, the enjoyment you get comes from cooperating with the other people that are crewing the vehicle. So everyone is looking out for targets, you are trying to coordinate as best you can to make sure your ship gets fixed, you aim at the right thing, and obviously in stuff like Air Buccaneers and Guns of Icarus, you are looking out for enemy ships coming at you because there is no minimap. If you don't see the ship, then you have no idea the bloody thing is actually there. So there is an inherent amount of cooperation involved in that. There were some games that did this in the past, and I very much enjoyed Fleet, which was actually a variant of Infantry. Infantry Online. Wow, that was a old-school SOE game. Perhaps some of you remember it alongside Cosmic Rift, which was a spiritual successor to Subspace. Good God, Subspace, that is going back a while. Fleet, if I recall correctly, allowed for some ships which could be piloted by one person, but they had a bunch of different other players become gunners for the ship. And I found that actually really enjoyable. That was an awesome experience. I also loved stuff like Battlefield 1942, where you could actually fly around in a bomber that required 3 people to pilot it. In Battlefield 3, I don't believe there's a single plane that actually requires 2 pilots to operate correctly. Battlefield 2 had quite a lot of them. Battlefield 3 doesn't have any of them. I know that you can get a couple of people in a helicopter, certainly, but in a plane, no, it's always a single-person aircraft, which is unfortunate. I always found it much more interesting when you had a couple of people in a plane. I would definitely love to see, later down the line, not only in PlanetSide, but in other games as well, vehicles that required 4+ people to actually properly operate. I'm not just talking about a transport vehicle where a bunch of people can barrel in, no, that actually require that many people to properly operate them. But the question is, how do you make it interesting for everybody? It's difficult, isn't it? It is a very challenging thing indeed. Do you throw in some mini-games every now and again to keep things varied, keep things interesting, make sure that the players are constantly engaged? What kind of functionality and what kind of responsibility do you give to each player? Is that player just a gunner? Because if they're just a gunner, it's really not that entertaining unless the gun is a hell of a lot of fun to fire. It's the same argument I keep hearing from people that want a Starship Simulator where you have different members of the crew, and this game actually now exists. It's called Artemis Bridge Simulator, and that's very much a cooperative experience. Being a certain officer is not necessarily interesting on its own. It's the cooperation between the crew members that makes it interesting. If you are performing simple tasks, that on its own isn't all that entertaining. If you're having to perform them at very specific times in cooperation with other people and relying on each other to make it work and communicating in real time when you are in a stressful situation, that's what makes it entertaining. It's not even so much a game mechanics issue. It all comes down to player interaction, and that is a true multiplayer co-op experience. Here's hoping we see something like that in PlanetSide and in some future Combined Arms FPS games. This one comes in from Anon that says, recently AMD has stated that they were laying off 20 to 30% of their staff. This layoff probably includes most of their engineering staff, which basically marks the death of AMD's creation of graphics cards and processors. This leaves Nvidia and Intel with basically a monopoly on their respective PC products, processors, and graphics cards. As a PC gamer myself, this scares me. All I can see is a slowdown in innovation from both companies. The question I wanted to get at is, how do you think this will affect innovation in the gaming world? Will a lack of innovation in PC hardware cause similar issues that this generation of consoles have caused? I would love to hear your opinion on this. It's grim news, honestly, it really is. You have to have some competition somewhere, otherwise stagnation does happen. What is the reason to innovate if you don't have to compete with anybody? If you don't constantly have the fear that someone is trying to do better than you? Now, it's not necessarily true that Nvidia would have a monopoly, but when it comes to power users, they pretty much would. Intel do integrated graphics, so I suppose they can compete to some degree, but again, there's nothing Intel makes that is anywhere close to, say, a 680 GTX. I really hope that this is not doom and gloom for AMD, but it may be getting to the point where it's looking likely, and that disturbs me greatly. I remember the time when AMD and Intel were very competitive with each other. They still are to some degree. It's not that ATI AMD graphics cards are bad or that their CPUs are bad, but they seem to have lost the CPU generation war like twice or three times in a row, which had never really happened to them previously. They were always able to provide a very good price-performance CPU, and for a lot of people, that's vitally important. Intel CPUs can get really, really expensive. When it comes to price performance, AMD usually wins there. But if you are a power user and you're looking for the best of the best, then Intel has been winning that battle for a very, very long time indeed. I hope we'll see a couple more companies actually get into the fray, or AMD just win one generation. That's what they need to do. Either win one generation of CPU hardware or one generation of graphics hardware. If they're able to do that very, very well indeed, which will probably involve a screw-up on Nvidia's part, then they can get right back into the game again. But at the moment, it is looking grim, and I hate the very notion. Competition is really important, especially when it comes to expensive research and development. It costs a lot to make a new graphics card, to actually develop it from scratch. It's the same with consoles as well. You don't have any reason to if you're not being beaten by somebody else. That's, I think, why the PS3 and Xbox 360 have stuck around for so long. They're pretty much equal systems. The Wii definitely wasn't a factor, and PC gaming isn't quite as popular, so they said, well, what's the point in us developing a new machine? People are happy with what they've got. So let's just keep on trucking, let's keep making a bunch of money this way. Maybe the Wii U will shake things up a bit, but who knows? It disturbs me greatly that we may enter a time when there is only one viable company to go to when it comes to graphics cards. I've used Nvidia for quite some time, but generally speaking, I look at each generation and I see which is the best option, then I go with that. So I've used quite a lot of ATI and AMD hardware in the past. Both companies are more than capable of screwing up, and they have frequently, so I never really held any brand loyalty. Here's hoping that they didn't actually lay off most of their engineering staff. I know that's pretty much speculation, so let's see how that turns out. The more worrying thing, it's not even just a case of a monopoly. What's even more worrying is the idea that companies that produce powerful PC hardware aren't going to be able to compete anymore because too many people are using tablets or whatever. In fact, the push for power isn't really here at the moment. Why would you need a more powerful CPU right now? What are you going to run with it? Do you want to explain that to me? What do you need a more powerful graphics card for? Again, what are you going to run with it? If you want to play games, they're going to be console ports. And console ports, as we're well aware, are very much behind the times. We're using old engines, the ports aren't even necessarily running natively in 1080p. If mobile domination continues, we could very well enter a period of PC stagnation, which would be very bad for everybody as far as I'm concerned. So here's hoping that doesn't happen. This one comes in from Acero that says, recently there's been a rise in the number of games that claim to be roguelikes. These games often include permadeath and have fairly short periods of gaming, ranging from possibly 10 to 90 minutes, as well as random generation of almost everything from levels to enemies. Permadeath in particular seems to have become a game mechanic. Dark Souls had a rather fleshed out death mechanic in comparison to other games, where it just happened and you lost all of your progress. I do not know for sure what was the first game to have permadeath. Well, Rogue was probably one good example, but I can say for sure that there has been a resurrection of some sort with this particular game mechanic. In the past, with early console gaming, death was not a mechanic, but more of a fact due to the limitations of the consoles, which did not have much memory storage for games, so they had to create a different way to elongate the game they made. This was usually making the game harder, just frustrating. My question to you is, what do you think about the aspect of the new emerging genre of roguelikes and the genre in general? I have personally enjoyed my experience with games of this genre, such as FTL, Dungeons of Dreadmore, and Realm of the Mad God, but do you think that the genre is suited for specific people and can be frustrating because of its difficulty, especially if you are not willing to learn the mechanics of the game? Well, if you're not willing to learn the mechanics of the game, you shouldn't really be playing anything that's got a roguelike element to it. When it comes to permadeath, Rogue is probably a really good example. There's a reason why roguelike games are the way that they are. Also, in reality, you could say that a hell of a lot of games had permadeath. I mean, what do you mean by that exactly? You're talking about a character that has progression, and then once it dies, that's it, game over, and that character is basically deleted. Because if you think about it, most console games were like that before the introduction of save states. Once you ran out of lives, that was it, and you had to start the entire game again. Essentially, that character, even though there wasn't all that much progression at all involved in him, is dead permanently, and your new state of the game is a complete wipe and do-over. I think that lately permadeath games have been coming back into fashion because of factors that you have mentioned. One of them being that a lot of these games actually don't take a huge amount of time. FTL can be played through pretty quickly, which is nice. Dungeons of Dreadmore doesn't take a huge amount of time, mostly because you die very quickly. And of course, Realm of the Mad God, you can just go in there, play your character, probably die, and then you've had a fun session in about an hour. Now, that's a good thing indeed, and I'm actually quite surprised that we don't see more roguelike style games on iOS devices and mobile stuff, because that's an ideal genre for that. I know there's a few, so don't even get onto me about that, but I would definitely like to see more. Permadeath is a nice challenge. I don't know about you, but I really get a kick out of restarting a game and starting everything fresh and seeing where the actual game takes me. When I start a new FTL game, I have no idea what kind of crew I will get, what kind of gear I will get, and what kind of enemies I'm going to end up encountering, even if I know what all the encounters actually are within the game, because getting them in a different order and getting equipment in a different order completely changes your playstyle, and you have to adapt to what the game throws at you. I think that it also adds a very strong degree of tension, which I find particularly enjoyable. There's a reason why I play XCOM on Iron Man mode, and I'm now on my 9th game, having failed the past 8, because you are forced to live with your consequences. If you don't have that element to the game, then the chances are you will decide that you want to so-called save scum, and what you do is you just reload until you get the right kind of result and so on and so forth. You are able to correct your mistakes, you're able to undo the things that you did, and I think the commitment aspect actually makes the game way more enjoyable. It makes it more atmospheric, it makes it more tense, and it makes it more strategic. I'm noticing a growing trend that it seems there is a large group of players that are into the idea that losing is fun. Losing is fun is a term that's probably originated with Dwarf Fortress, honestly. And since then, there have been a number of games where losing is fun. In FTL, losing is fun. Losing troops in XCOM might be a heart-wrenching experience, but it's still fun. You realize that the game is out to punish you whenever it possibly can. Dungeons of Dreadmore, losing is fun. Realm of the Mad God, losing is fun. And of course, all sorts of roguelikes like Ancient Domains of Masochism, Dungeon Crawl, Stone Soup, all of the Angband series, everything that's sprung out of Rogue and Umoria, NetHack. God, there are so many games. But I think that thanks to the rise of Steam, we are actually getting some of these games break through into almost the mainstream. Dungeons of Dreadmore sold a hell of a lot of copies. It was very successful. FTL, also very successful. More and more people seem to be waking up to the fact that this is fun, and they want more games with this permadeath mechanic in it. Hopefully we will get that. I'm looking forward to it. This one comes in from Andy W. that says, as an avid fan of RPGs for the past 15 years, I've noticed significant changes in dialogue style and depth, which I feel is one of the core elements to this genre. In particular, I'm starting to find a lot of modern 20th and 21st century lingo, especially military phrases, in recent fantasy RPGs, such as Dragon Age 2. I also find that while there's a lot of good voice acting in modern RPGs, I often find my conversation responses heavily restricted and very short, often stripped down to good, bad, and neutral one-liners. I found these things often broke my immersion and led to quite a shallow experience. To make sure I wasn't being purely nostalgic, I recently replayed some older RPGs. In the case of these older games, I usually found the writing to be much more period relevant and richer in depth, creating a more immersive experience and leading to better developed storylines and characters. Even in games such as Deus Ex, which was fully voice acted, the quality of the writing was exceptional. Another good example is Planescape Torment, which contains over 800,000 words of quality dialogue in one of the most original video game stories ever written. I'm wondering what your opinions are in regards to the quality of writing and dialogue in RPGs over the years, and whether or not modern RPGs struggle from a lack of depth and or immersion. Well, you know what, as much as I love Deus Ex, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on the idea that Deus Ex was actually well written. It really either wasn't well written or was just horribly voice acted. I think it may have been a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. There are some good lines in Deus Ex. There are. There really are. And there are some fantastic characters in Deus Ex that put out some truly unique stuff. However, it's really not well presented or well delivered at all, and honestly, even though JC Denton is one of my favorite characters, the way that he reacts to some things is just ridiculous. I mean, the whole what a shame and, oh my god, JC, a bomb! A bomb! Nonsense was just beyond a joke. That was immersion breaking, I'll tell you that for a fact. Don't even get me started with the nonsense that happens in Hong Kong. God, all the dialogue there is absolutely cringeworthy. One way or the other, I think it actually might come down to the amount of voice acting that is in modern games. Now, if you compare Dragon Age to Dragon Age 2, yeah, there's one key difference. Dragon Age kind of straddles the line between the old school CRPG and the newer school BioWare material. And then you've got Dragon Age 2, which is basically Mass Effect in a fantasy world. So the dialogue system there is like Shepard's dialogue system in Mass Effect. In Dragon Age 1, it's a bunch of silent responses. You get to pick from 4, maybe even up to 6 responses, and they are not read out at all. And that's interesting. I think that gives you a lot more options when it comes to immersion and actually role-playing the character in the specific way that you want to. The problem with the Mass Effect system is that you only kind of get an inkling as to what the character's going to say, and then the character says something completely different, and you're like, I really wouldn't have said that, and that causes immersion problems, and also the quality of the writing is not necessarily great. I mean, on the flip side, some of the stuff that Shepard actually says, and even some of the stuff Hawke actually says, is really well written, and there are some well written characters there too. Not to mention the fact, of course, that some of the best written characters I've seen in a BioWare game are actually in the original Dragon Age and are fully voice acted. But here's the thing, I think if you make your character silent and allow for text responses, then you open up an awful lot more options. If you don't, and if you just have them deliver a line on the basis of a vague feeling, like, say, the aggressive line, or the really nice line, or the humorous line, then you run into the immersion problem once again. In theory, you should be able to write this stuff really, really well, because you know for a fact that the character's going to say one of 3 different things, so you can have the other characters react accordingly, and yet somehow the dialogue in Dragon Age 2 just isn't as good as in Dragon Age 1, where you actually had more options. I really don't know if Dragon Age 2 is a good example, because honestly, that game was obviously rushed. It really was. So I have to wonder if the dialogue just isn't as good because they didn't have enough time to fully flesh it out properly. Also, of course, comes down to the script writers and how well the characters are presented. The problem is that we really can't go back to the Planescape Torment way of doing things outside of very niche or very specific instances. We could probably pull it off with Project Eternity, but I imagine that's going to end up being voice acted for the most part. Planescape Torment had a lot of words, and most people don't even have the patience these days to deal with that. 800,000 words of quality dialogue. That's insane, really, when you think about it. How much voice acting would have to be done in order to make that work? Well, let me tell you this, there were just over 200,000 lines of dialogue voiced by 200 voice actors. Good God. 200 voice actors in the Old Republic, and it was astonishingly expensive to do that. No one else can pull that off, and considering how badly that game tanked, I think that no one will try to do it again. So, attempting to voice act that much would be difficult, to say the least. You know, I almost think the quality of writing has gone down due to the fact that game developers seem to be focusing more on the idea of the cinematic Hollywood experience, and they're bringing in writers from other mediums, whereas Planescape Torment was written by people that made video games. When you're writing a video game, you have an awful lot more to consider than you do in a book or a movie. Book or a movie, very much a directed experience, and the character development occurs without you being involved in any way, shape, or form. That's the nature of it. It's a non-interactive medium. With games, you have an interactive medium, and as such, you do have some control over how the other characters develop, and as a result, you have to adapt your dialogue accordingly. Not to mention, I might add, that a movie may last 2 hours, whereas a game could last upwards of 20, and you're going to be experiencing an awful lot more of that character. You're going to be with them pretty much all the time, if they happen to be a party member, so they've got to develop constantly, and the dialogue has got to be there even for the incidental, not-so-interesting stuff. And I think the dialogue feels very forced indeed when Hollywood scriptwriters try and get a hold of games and try and write them in the same way that a movie would be written. I'll be honest, I'm no writer, so I really don't know how to fix that, but it's definitely a problem, and it's unfortunate. We're not seeing all that many games come out that have amazing writing, and hopefully that'll be something that more focus is put on when we start to get games like Shadowrun Returns, like Wasteland 2, and of course like Project Eternity. Alright folks, thus ends the mailbox. It has been a good run, it really has. There have been many things said on this show, some of them great, some of them completely and totally dumb. I first started doing the mailbox all the way back in May 2011. May the 25th was when I launched it, and this was just after we brought to a close the series of Azeroth Daily. I took the mailbox and I turned it into a show. It's difficult to say how much mailbox content was really made. All I know is there's 200 episodes. If you average them at about 17 minutes each, you're looking at 3,400 minutes of mailbox content, which of course, if you divide by 60, will give you 56 hours of mailbox. That's quite ridiculous, and that's been over the course of the last year and a half. It's been a good run. It's been a good show. I think it's probably time that we move on and do something a little bit more interesting. So it is my pleasure to officially announce Content Patch, which will be the show which replaces Mailbox going forward. It will be a news show. It's going to be as simple as that. It will be news and comment. Those of you thinking it's just going to be me sitting there reading out the news will, of course, be mistaken. It will very much be news and comment. It will most likely be one part news to one part punditry, and you will be getting my opinions on essentially every story that I decide to read out. And there will also, of course, be the interactive element, the way that we're going to be turning the Mailbox concept on its head by encouraging your comments on a particular topic that I give you on a daily basis. The show will be running 5 days a week. It will look pretty slick, nicely professional. Those of you wondering whether or not it will be a talking head show where you'll actually see me on camera, no, I will not be doing that. I don't see the point. And quite frankly, there are more interesting things that I can put on screen, and we will be making use of those particular assets. For a long time, I've been thinking about putting on a more professional show than the Mailbox, because let's be honest, the Mailbox was just my opinion over some gameplay footage in the background, and that's not particularly cool. I think we can do better than that. I think that Azeroth Daily had a number of interesting ideas that can be learned from. I think we can do an awful lot better than that, because Azeroth Daily was very slideshow-like. I think we can make it a hell of a lot better. We can incorporate video in a far superior fashion, and we can also incorporate elements that will allow you to navigate your way around the episode very easily indeed. I'm looking forward to getting this all sorted out for you and presenting you with the first episode and hearing your feedback on how the format works and then tweaking it to your liking. Thank you very much for watching and supporting the Mailbox over the last 200 episodes, ladies and gentlemen, and I shall indeed see you with Content Patch next time.